Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan built an empire that, at its peak, covered over 9 million square miles and ruled nearly 100 million people, roughly a quarter of the world's population at the time. From the Pacific coast of China to the edge of Eastern Europe, his empire stretched across continents. Historians estimate that around 40 million people died during the Mongol conquests. Entire cities were erased. Kingdoms collapsed at the mere rumor of his armies approaching. He was one of the most destructive conquerors in human history, and after decades of surviving assassinations, brutal wars, and campaigns that crushed half the known world, you would expect Genghis Khan to die on a battlefield. But he didn't. In 1227, while leading another military campaign against the Tangut Kingdom, the most feared man on earth suddenly vanished from history. And the strange part is this: nobody actually knows how he died. Some claim he was thrown from his horse during a hunt, and the injuries never healed. Others believe he died from disease, possibly even the bubonic plague. But a Chinese document from that actual time period tells a much more disturbing story. According to that version, a captured Tangut queen was brought to Genghis Khan's tent. Before he could touch her, she attacked him with a hidden weapon. No one knows exactly what the weapon was or where she hid it, but the story became widespread enough that even modern historians still discuss it seriously. The truth is, nobody knows which version is real. But what happened after his death may be even stranger. His army was never told he had died. The campaign continued. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan's body was secretly transported thousands of miles back to Mongolia. And then came his final command. He wanted to be buried with absolutely no marker, nothing that could reveal where he was laid to rest. The grave of Genghis Khan has never been found. The man who conquered half the known world disappeared from history without leaving a single confirmed trace of where he ended up. Leopold of Belgium. Leopold II of Belgium is someone most people have never heard of, but this man is responsible for the deaths of millions of people. He never led an army. He stayed in Brussels his entire life, surrounded by luxury, paintings, sculptures, and his own obsession with grandeur, while his agents in the Congo carried out mass killings, forced labor, and brutal punishments that destroyed millions of lives. The way it worked was simple and horrific. Congolese workers were forced to meet rubber extraction quotas. If they failed to meet the quota, their hands were cut off. It was policy. Conservative estimates put the death toll at around 10 million people. And for years, the system continued, while Leopold maintained the image of a humanitarian mission, claiming he was bringing civilization and development to the region. But by 1908, photographs, reports, and eyewitness accounts had reached a point where the truth could no longer be ignored. The Belgian parliament voted to take control of the Congo away from him and turn it into a state colony. He had to watch the system he had controlled for more than 2 decades be taken away through a parliamentary decision. He protested, he appealed, but nothing changed. In 1909, he died from complications following intestinal surgery at the age of 74. And when his funeral procession moved through the streets of Brussels, the reaction was not silence. It was the sound of a crowd that did not forget what had happened in the Congo. Adolf Hitler. When Soviet forces entered Berlin in April 1945, Hitler's world collapsed in real time. Inside a concrete bunker, he was still receiving reports for armies that no longer existed. Entire divisions had already been destroyed, yet orders were still being written as if the war could be reversed. On April 29th, he married Eva Braun in a small, hurried ceremony held deep underground. There were no celebrations, only a few witnesses in a sealed room. The next day, April 30th, everything ended. Around mid-afternoon, Hitler and Eva Braun went into their private quarters and closed the door. Moments later, Eva Braun took poison. Hitler took cyanide and then fired a gun into his head. Their bodies were removed from the room and taken up the bunker stairs into the garden above, where Soviet shells were landing nearby. Petrol was poured over them and they were set on fire. The flames burned in the chaos of a collapsing city. When Soviet troops finally reached the area, only fragments remained. Even then, the identity of what was left would become the subject of decades of secrecy and later forensic confirmation. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin had built a system where fear controlled everything, a state where even small decisions could carry deadly consequences if interpreted incorrectly. So when he retreated to his dacha outside Moscow on the night of March 1st, 1953, Nothing unusual seemed to happen at first. He held a late dinner with his closest inner circle, as he often did. The meeting went on until the early hours of the morning. Around 4 a.m., Stalin dismissed everyone and went to his private quarters. After that, the building went silent, but no one entered. Hours passed, still silence. The reason was simple. In Stalin's system, entering a room without permission could itself be seen as an offense. Even uncertainty could become dangerous. So the guards stayed outside the locked door and waited. No orders came. No movement was heard. Only time passed. It wasn't until the next evening that someone finally looked inside. Stalin was on the floor of his room, unconscious and partially paralyzed after suffering a massive stroke during the night. He had been lying there for hours without help. By then, his condition was critical. Medical assistance was finally called, but even then, decisions were slow, shaped by fear of making the wrong move around him. Over the next few days, he remained alive but unresponsive. On March 5, 1953, Joseph Stalin died. Mao Zedong. By any measure of scale, Mao Zedong belongs at the top of this list. The Great Leap Forward, his forced collectivization and industrialization campaign between 1958 and 1962, led to a famine that killed somewhere between 15 and 55 million people. The exact number remains disputed because official records were suppressed for decades. What is not disputed is the cause: policies that directly triggered mass starvation, while the scale of the disaster was hidden. Then came the Cultural Revolution in 1966, a decade of political purges, public humiliation, and institutional collapse that tore through Chinese society and reshaped it from the ground up. He ruled China for 27 years. For much of that time, he was treated less like a political leader and more like an ideological symbol, almost untouchable. But by the early 1970s, his body began to fail. Mao developed ALS, a progressive neurological disease that slowly destroys the nerves controlling movement and speech. His voice became increasingly unclear. Speaking required assistance.
What do you want?
By the time Richard Nixon visited Beijing in 1972, Mao could barely communicate on his own. In his final year, Mao spent much of his time in a specially constructed indoor pool. Floating in the water was the only way he could relieve the weight of his failing body. He died on September 9, 1976, at the age of 82. Within weeks of his death, his wife and several senior officials, later known as the Gang of Four, were arrested by the same system he had shaped for decades. Today, his portrait still hangs over Tiananmen Square. His image still appears on currency. But the country he left behind moved, step by step, away from the world he built.